Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, May 15th. Looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean, we see an area of disturbed weather creating minor seas. This is the start of a gale that is to develop and get a little bit stronger, but nothing spectacular, and likely the last gale of the winter season of the 2015-2016 El Nino. Let's start this week's tour by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales, and when those gales form, also help direct their track. We're looking for troughs. That is a little dip in the jet stream like here and here. That supports a counterclockwise circulation in the winds in the upper atmosphere and also down at the lower atmosphere, which is the hallmark of low pressure. Low pressure, of course, generates winds. Winds generate seas. Seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, generate swell, and swell, of course, generates surf. So we have two little troughs we're looking at the 18Z run of the model here on Sunday. Let's put this into motion. This first trough here is expected to produce some sort of a little tiny gale working its way up into the Gulf of Alaska, but nothing significant. Now notice this. It's kind of interesting. This is a pretty steep trough here with 140, almost 150 knot winds pushing into it and holding decently into almost Wednesday before the trough starts getting pinched off, but still is in play almost into Friday, and then it sort of fades. Also notice an upper level trough here developing over the U.S. West Coast. That would suggest low pressure down at the surface as well, but it's kind of cut off from the main flow. That is, here's the main flow. It does this thing here and goes up and basically passes north. This guy's completely cut off from that energy. Then there's this weak little split jet stream flow running to the south as well. Anyway, that gets us into Saturday next weekend, and that pattern generally holds into, well, let's just keep going and see where it goes. We get a week out. Still, the jet, given the time of year that we're into almost the end of May, reasonably cohesive and reasonably well to the south, the hangover from a solid El Nino that occurred this past winter. Let's go take a look down at the surface. So as expected, the trough that was here, we see a little low pressure here. What is that? About 992 millibars. Not very strong. Weak winds. What is that? A little patch of 30-knot winds there and there. But that's supposed to build by this evening. That's about 4 o'clock. So actually, that's about the time we're recording it here. 35-knot winds forecast in the southern quadrant of this gale, pushing all to the east, mostly bypassing Hawaii. This system is to lift northeast, 35-knot winds even into Monday morning and into Monday night. And then the system falls apart in the Gulf. Now also notice here, about that time, high pressure starts building down at the surface. Also remember there was another trough here, and you see that starting to manifest itself with low pressure here over the dateline. Roll this out. This guy just doesn't get particularly well organized. He tries to set up but gets pulled to the north rather quickly. High pressure builds off the U.S. West Coast, 1036 millibars. Low pressure here over the Great Basin. That forms a pressure gradient and north winds along the U.S. West Coast. That is part of that upper level cutoff low. Now remember, upper level winds don't always stack vertically exactly in sync with what goes on down at the surface. In this case, the trough was back here, but at the surface it manifests itself inland a bit, just a little bit. Anyway, you get this kind of north wind gradient thing going on till Friday, and that dissipates, but still good for wind swell along the U.S. West Coast. And then things just kind of fall apart. No low pressure of any consequence and no real fetch indicated. So things definitely slowing down as we work our way towards summer here. Let's go take a look at the significant wave height charts. So here we go, significant wave heights, North Pacific Ocean, as expected. Low pressure here, generating a little bit of fetch, and seas 16 feet, whopping 16 feet here, northeast of Hawaii, or north of Hawaii. Building into, here we go, to the evening, let's say 4 p.m., 18 feet. That might be good for some wind swell down in the islands, but the model isn't even suggesting that. But then we get into Monday morning, 20-foot seas, aimed reasonably well at the U.S. West Coast, and go, maybe you get some 12 or 13-second period swell out of that. But wind swell is also starting to build with the local gradient along the California coast. Anyway, seas build to about almost 22 feet on Monday night. So in association with this gale as it tracks off to the northeast. The gradient here and north local wind swell, probably pretty decent in size, occurring. The next little low pressure system out on the dateline here Tuesday night starts developing, but we saw no real fetch associated with, and whatever fetch there was aimed north towards the Bering Sea, and that's pretty much what the wave models suggest as well. So we roll this out, and it's basically a wind swell fest for California, and nothing relative to Hawaii, and we'll just keep going here, and then things just fall apart. So pretty much not a whole lot going on for the North Pacific Ocean other than local wind swell, and that's about typical given this time of year. Now, the good news is it's not all doom and gloom. The southern hemisphere, as would be expected, is starting to wake up. We had a gale, 33-foot seas, almost 34-foot seas. This is Saturday a week ago, developing southeast of New Zealand. Nothing like a really strong gale, but the interesting part here is about Sunday a week ago, this system with 32-foot seas started lifting northeast. A pretty decent little pulse of swell from that is expected to radiate up into California, though most of the energy here you can see is aimed at Peru and that area, but still sideband swell expected starting Monday for both South and North California. Now here's the fun part. A secondary little fetch developed with 32, 33-foot seas, and yet a tertiary fetch developed on Wednesday producing some seas. So, and then things quieted down beyond that. Swell is in the water, radiating northeast, mostly expected to bypass Hawaii. Hawaii's like up in here, and most of this fetch was over here, so bypassing Hawaii, and certainly down into Mexico, Central America, and into Peru. But then we look at the forecast, and things are not as exciting as one would hope. There's not a whole lot of activity projected. A little area of 22-foot seas, that isn't even going to make it up into the U.S. West Coast. Maybe good for Tahiti. That's as of Thursday. Now, a little bit of interest here in the Tasman Sea relative to Fiji. 40-foot seas on Thursday, building into the 45, 46-foot range, and holding pretty decently into almost Saturday. That could also send some small southwest swell into the Hawaiian Islands, so they get some of the action. U.S. West Coast, for the most part, is not going to see any of that, though. And then we get into a week out, and still not a whole lot going on. So the swell coming for this coming work week is probably the best shot of anything relative to California. Make the most of it. Let's go take a look long term. No longer are we talking about El Nino. It is now official. La Nina 2016-2017 getting its hooks into the Pacific Ocean. First up, we take a look at surface winds in the Kelvin wave generation area. That is the area between about 140 east, out a little bit west, east of the dateline, out to about 170. Draw a box right here, 5 north, 5 south. Clear we see trades in effect, trades across the entire equatorial region. Pretty solid. No westerly winds. There's this one little arrow here, but the reality is there's nothing going on. You look at this chart here, though, what we're really seeing is these are pretty normal trades for this time of year. So no signs of any westerly wind burst. Even if there was, you wouldn't get a Kelvin wave out of it because there is no warmer than normal water in this area to push off to the east. El Nino has basically drained that away, and now we need about 5 to 6 years of recharge before the next El Nino gets rolling in, unless something very unusual happens. And a quick look at the surface level wind chart for the Kelvin wave generation area right here. You see easterly winds, not unusually strong. What is that? Maybe 6 to 8 knots. And then out here into the 15-knot range. But even down here, the winds when El Nino was at its weakest were dead calm. Now even easterly trades in the 8 to 10 knot range are starting to take root, suggesting that El Nino has lost its grip of the Kelvin wave generation area. And here's a way to look at history. We've seen this before. The date lines right here. Reds and yellows suggest westerly anomalies. This is the whole globe on a single chart. Kelvin wave generation area runs down from there to about here, go the whole way down the chart. Blues are easterly anomalies. Now this is up at the 850 millibar level. Typically, the anomalies are a little bit overstated compared to what's going on down at the surface, but still a reasonable proxy for what's forecast for the surface. And as you see here now, for the next week per the GFS model, easterly anomalies fully entrenched, taking over the Kelvin wave generation area, a classic sign of La Nina. Now here's the scale down here. These anomalies are forecast to be pretty strong, but probably not as strong as this chart suggests down at the surface. But clearly, no westerly anomalies are forecast in this area. Next, we take a 2-week look-out view, specifically in relation to the MJO, because the MJO still has the potential to affect winds in the Kelvin wave generation area. As expected right now, the inactive phase of the MJO, the outgoing long wave radiation model, so yellows and oranges suggest less cloud cover, more sunlight reflectivity off the ocean surface, therefore high pressure, enhanced trades, and the inactive phase of the MJO, with the active phase hold up here south of India. In fact, there are reports of typhoons in this area that would typically be expected when the active phase is in the Indian Ocean. Anyway, so the inactive phase forecast to slowly fade out per the statistic model about 2 weeks out. The dynamic model, sort of think of it as the ensemble version of the GFS model, is forecast to hold with the inactive phase for the next 2 weeks over the Kelvin wave generation area, with the active phase of the MJO hold up in the Indian Ocean. The phase diagrams pretty much suggest the same thing. Imagine looking down on the North Pole of our planet, and you rotate counterclockwise from, say, the date line here to the West Pacific, over the U.S., into the Atlantic and Africa, and then back around to the Indian Ocean, over the maritime continent, and back to the date line. The further the dot is, the dot tells you where the active phase of the MJO is. The further from this center circle, the stronger it is. So the ECMF model suggests a moderately strong active phase of the MJO, forecast to make its way towards the maritime continent, but crash 2 weeks out and weaken. The GEFS model says pretty much the same thing, but not crashing. But clearly, no sign of the active phase making it to the date line or into the West Pacific, anything like that, which suggests that the inactive phase is to hold for the next 2 weeks. And yet a longer lookout, this per the CFS model, again, 850 millibar wind, so up a bit, about 4,500 feet in the atmosphere. And here's the date line running here. Now this chart, past history is down here. The forecast is up here. We see previous westerly wind bursts, the oranges and the yellows. But here's where we are right now. Kelvin wave generation area right about in here. Easterly anomalies forecast, but come about May 22nd or so, it looks like those anomalies are to back off. Here's the MJO. So the easterly, the dotted line is the inactive phase of the MJO. Forecast to hold into about, the end of May. Let's say about the 30th or so, roughly. Then a very weak active phase is forecast with barely any westerly anomalies, probably just neutral. And then sort of a mixed pattern on out into August. Nothing really strong, or just a muddled kind of pattern. The MJO really not doing a whole lot. So more of the same forecast the whole way through summer is basically what we're seeing right now. So the MJO is to provide no support really one way or the other. So what's dictating the weather pattern and the status of the oceans right now? Let's take a look. Subsurface water temperatures. East Pacific here, West Pacific here. Consider this Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands. Over here, the Philippines and west of New Guinea. Warm water now, instead of being over here where it was during our El Nino pattern, is already retrograded, starting to rebuild in the far west Pacific. The 28-degree isotherm, normally, during El Nino, which was extending over towards the Galapagos, is retreating. Maybe it'll retreat a little bit further, and we expect this pocket of warm water to only build over the next coming years, while generally cool temperatures prevail subsurface here. Remember, we're down 100 meters, 300 feet in the East Pacific. Anomalies, differences in normal for this time of year, where prior 6 months ago we saw all kinds of warm water here. Here is the last of our El Nino warm pool, 1 degree above normal temperatures, only going down maybe 50 meters or so, and this is steadily shrinking. Where we used to have warm pockets of water working their way across the Pacific under the equator and erupting along the Ecuador and Galapagos coast, now we have what's this almost 5 degree below normal water under the date line, working its way east. Cool water already advecting to the surface. We'll see what that means in a minute. But basically, this is La Nina pattern for sure. A river of cold water working its way to the east, enabling warmer water to start building over here. And the interesting part is, so the balance, this is all about equilibrium in the ocean. We've had too much warm water here with El Nino. Nature and the atmosphere and the ocean sense that. They're correcting. They're sending cold water in to replace it. Unfortunately, they always send too much. That's how you get La Nina. And then warm water starts building here. Eventually, it overcorrects itself, and then a change has to be made about 5 years later, and then the warm water starts sloshing back to the East Pacific. Trades die, enabling that to happen, and then you're back into El Nino. So it's about every 5 to 7 years it swings back and forth. The strength of those is what is of more interest. Unfortunately, it's way too early to know anything about a possible El Nino 5 years from now. We are focused right now on La Nina, and it certainly looks pretty solid at this point in time. Here's another view of the subsurface cool pool. You can see it here. This is higher resolution, but same basic picture. The last of El Nino here, traveling off to the west and quickly fading. Cool water on the move to the east. And here's the surface ocean temperature pattern. Clearly you can see this meandering little stream of cooler than normal water, maybe 2 or 3 degrees north and south of the equator, just building, starting just off the coast of Ecuador over the Galapagos, and now, last week it made it to 140, now it's almost out to 160, about 155 south of Hawaii. This is a clear La Nina signal. Again, this is part of that cooler than normal water that's working its way under the equator, starting to reach the surface here and get carried off to the west. Also trades blowing in this area, causing mixing and upwelling. The actual trend, temperature trend over the past 7 days, you can see it as well. Cool water here, just the whole way along this. But notice up here, those cooler waters stop at about 155. The trend here suggests, look at this, you can even see pockets extending the whole way over here. And what's even more interesting, you see this mirror pattern developing off of Africa. This is what typically happens early on in La Nina and in El Nino. We saw this in El Nino, warm water building in this area, what was that, 2 years ago? Now we see the opposite, cool water showing up here, mirroring what's going on in the Pacific. Basically, the whole, there isn't going to be any holding this back. Now, the good news is warm temperatures have recovered some here, warmer than normal temperatures are along the California coast because high pressure got knocked down, north winds backed off, and temperatures warmed up reasonably nice. But this week, another bout of north winds driven by high pressure is expected. That should take the edge off some of these warmer waters. And also there's pockets, there is pockets of warm water all in here. That is expected to probably hold. It'll take a while for La Nina to bloom and start erasing temperatures the warmer temperatures further away from the equator. In fact, you can see it here. Here's the zoomed in. Cooler normal temperatures all along the coast of Peru. Basically, south winds howling here, probably slightly offshore, causing upwelling, and then just getting caught by the trades, blowing out the whole way up to, about 157 west, so easily south of, there's Hawaii right there. And then here is the El Nino warm temperatures north and south of there. But this, well, let's see, if that's 5 north, this cool pool is building a little bit at a time and will only build more over time and eventually should wipe out all of the El Nino warmth in these areas. But it'll take 6 months to a year for that to happen. Also, one other thing to notice back in this picture, notice cool water here. This is classic active phase of the PDO sort of signal. A little bit too early to declare anything, but something worth noting. And since we're about ready to go talk coupling of the atmosphere with the ocean, let's go take a look at the PDO index. So before we get into this month's reading, here's a nice little chart we found out on the web. The PDO, cool phase, and the active phase or the warm phase. You can see we were in a cool phase in the 70s, and then somewhere about 75, 76 or so, it started working into the active phase. Now what we mean by this is in the cool phase, then the disposition in the Pacific Ocean is that of La Nina. El Ninos have a harder time getting a foothold. Then we get into the 75 era, 1975, the whole way up into the 88, and even maybe a little bit beyond that. Things dipped, but even here into 98, this was a good, 70 to, 25-year run of the active phase or the up phase, the warm phase of the PDO. And then after the 98 El Nino, things went really negative. We had a little burp there, but in general, things have been negative. And here's where we are now starting in 2014. Now, the neat thing about this chart is the 12-month running average is overlaid, and you can kind of see that, but even more so, it's the 5-year moving average that really gives you a sense of what's going on. Here, the disposition was for the index to be negative, and then we got to about 75, and it started working its way positive. And even during this dip here, it never went below neutral, still came up and was well positive into the super El Nino of 97, 98. The 82, 83 El Nino was here as well, and there was also a good little pulse in 86. And then here we go, in the early 2000s, things were going south, but still reasonably warm. And then here's where we've been the past 5 years, down in here, definitely the down phase of the PDO. Now the question is, will this continue? Notice these spikes here. They kind of come and they go, but generally the blue, the yearly data is on the positive side. And so the question is, will 2016, notice they haven't updated the chart here in a while, but the question is, will 2016 stay positive or go negative? Let's go take a quick gander. So this is NOAA's index. The current data for April suggests we're higher than we were for March, and March was looking pretty good. And as you can see, we even go back, we have positive numbers going to, where is that? Somewhere in early 2014, and that exactly coincides with when this El Nino first started getting going, about February of 2014. You can see ever since then, for the most part, numbers have been positive and pretty strongly at points, and that continues to this date. Now, you can't say we're in the plus phase or the warm phase of the PDO just yet, because we've only been at it for 2 years. We probably need another 2 to go before one can start getting a definitive sense of where we're at. But it's going to be interesting to see what effect La Nina has on the PDO, and whether the PDO goes negative and stays negative, or we just get a month or two of negative readings, but it's, doesn't get deeply into the negative phase. If that's the case, and this La Nina kind of comes out looking not that bad and not as dire as some folks might suggest, then that would be an indication that perhaps the PDO is turning in our favor. And if it does that, then maybe we're set for 15 years of maybe wetter weather for California, and more surf for the North Pacific Ocean. But way too early to know for sure yet. Otherwise, the shorter-term indexes that are used to gauge the effects of El Nino or La Nina on the atmosphere, the Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti, it had been running here pretty negative, as you can see, but now is slowly, the daily numbers are inching their way up today, minus 1.90. The 30-day running average, which was down in the 18s and minus 19, is up to minus 11.93. The 90-day running average used to monitor the status of El Nino, which was down to about 14.99, is now up to minus 14. Still not too bad, suggesting that El Nino still has influence in the atmosphere, but that the inactive phase of the MJO, at least from a daily perspective, is having some impact and sort of muting the numbers and the index. Likewise, the ESPI index, similar to the Southern Oscillation Index, other than the fact that it monitors actual rainfall north of Darwin and in the Niños 2, 3, and 4 region, and then some. Positive numbers suggest El Nino, negative numbers suggest La Nina. Currently still 0.81, down a little bit from last week, which was about 0.9 or so. So still El Nino influencing the atmosphere, but we expect as we get deeper into the summer that will fade towards a neutral pattern or a neutral number there. So for now, one last small little gale forecast for the Gulf of Alaska in the next 2 days. 20-foot seas or so, maybe 22-foot seas, pushing towards the U.S. West Coast, but that swell will be buried in local wind swell. But local wind swell is swell nonetheless. Take what you can get. Of more interest maybe is small southern hemi swell, probably a 4 or 5 day run of that, expected for the U.S. West Coast from Monday probably into Friday, if not dribbles into Saturday. Something to ride, but after that, nothing at all on the charts. Make the most of it. A bit of a swell drought is expected, unless you just choose to ride wind swell, and that will probably keep going pretty good for quite a while. Longer term projections, El Nino slowly fading out. La Nina definitely becoming obvious from surface ocean temperature perspective. PDO keeping us a little bit on pins and needles here, hopefully trending in the right direction, but it will be a couple of years before anything solid really comes of that. So that's it for this week. We'll do it again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.